Admiral Krek Knox adjusted his ceremonial battle claws for the third time in 10 minutes, the metallic scraping echoing through the command chamber of the Valdorian flagship Apex Predator. Oh, how fitting that name would prove to be, in the most ironic way possible. "Sir, the human fleet has arrived at the designated coordinates," reported Lieutenant Vashkil, her voice carrying that particular tone of barely contained amusement that had become standard when discussing these primitive creatures. 17 vessels total. Quite the impressive showing for such a backward species. Krek Knox's mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among his kind. 17 ships. Against the might of the Valdorian hegemony's Third Fleet, 412 vessels of pure technological superiority, each one capable of glassing a small moon. The humans had either developed a sense of humor, or they were even more delusional than the psychological profiles suggested. "Patch me through to their lead vessel," Krek Knox commanded, settling into his command throne with the confidence of someone who had never lost a battle. Well, there's always a first time for everything, isn't there? The holographic display flickered to life, revealing a human female with short auburn hair and eyes that seemed far too calm for someone facing certain annihilation. Captain Elena Vasquez of the United Earth Defense Force vessel Indomitable stared back at him with an expression that could generously be described as mildly interested. "Greetings, Admiral," she said, her voice carrying a pleasant, conversational tone that made Krek Knox's secondary stomach churn with irritation. "I'm Captain Vasquez. I believe you wanted to discuss our surrender." The bridge fell silent except for the soft humming of life support systems. Several junior officers exchanged glances, their confusion palpable. Krek Knox leaned forward, his 4 eyes narrowing to slits. "Your surrender, human. The Valdorian hegemony does not negotiate with inferior species. You will power down your weapons, prepare for boarding, and submit to immediate colonization protocols. Your resistance ends here." Vasquez tilted her head slightly, as if considering a mildly interesting weather forecast. That's not really going to work for us, Admiral. You see, we humans have this peculiar little habit. We don't particularly enjoy being told what to do by oversized space lobsters with delusions of grandeur." The insult hit the bridge like a plasma torpedo. Gasps of outrage rippled through the command crew, and Krek Knox's claws extended involuntarily. "Space lobsters?" "You dare," he began, his voice rising to a threatening growl. "Oh, I dare plenty," Vasquez interrupted, her smile widening just enough to show teeth. "In fact, Admiral, I'd like to make you a counteroffer. How about you turn those pretty ships of yours around, head back to whatever rock you crawled out from under, and we'll pretend this whole embarrassing display of posturing never happened." Lieutenant Vashkil's laugh came out as more of a snort. "Captain, with all due respect to your optimism, you are outnumbered 24 to 1. Your vessels are primitive, your weapons are outdated, and your tactics are non-existent. Perhaps you should reconsider your position." 24 to 1? Vasquez repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Gosh, those are some pretty steep odds." She paused, appearing to consider this information seriously. "Tell me, Lieutenant, have you ever heard the human expression David and Goliath?" "I am not familiar with your primitive folklore," Vashkil replied dismissively. "Pity. It's quite relevant to your current situation." Vasquez's fingers moved across her console with practiced efficiency. "Admiral, you have exactly 60 seconds to begin your withdrawal. After that, well, let's just say your insurance premiums are about to go through the roof." Krek Knox's laughter boomed across the bridge, joined by the amused chittering of his crew. 60 seconds. This human was either insane or suffering from some sort of neurological defect. Either way, it would make for an amusing story to share at the victory celebration. "Human, your bravado is entertaining but ultimately futile. All vessels, assume attack formation Omega-7. Prepare to demonstrate why the Valdorian hegemony rules this galaxy." 412 warships moved with choreographed precision, their hulls gleaming in the starlight as they formed an impenetrable wall of destruction. Weapon systems, powered up with a symphony of deadly harmonics, shield generators hummed to life, and targeting computers locked onto the pitiful human fleet with ruthless efficiency. 45 seconds, Admiral, Vasquez announced cheerfully, as if discussing dinner plans. "Your time is up, human," Knox declared, raising his primary claw toward the firing control. "All vessels, open fire. Show these primitives the price of defying the hegemony." And that, as they say, is when things got interesting. The first volley of Valdorian plasma charges streaked across space like angry crimson stars, each one carrying enough destructive power to vaporize a city block. They struck the human vessels with perfect accuracy, lighting up the darkness with brilliant explosions that should have marked the end of humanity's foolish resistance. Should have. Instead, the human ships emerged from the plasma storm completely unscathed, their hulls not even showing scorch marks. Worse yet, they were accelerating, directly toward the Valdorian fleet. What? Knox's voice trailed off as his tactical display updated with information that made no sense whatsoever. "Vashkill, explain to me why our weapons had no effect." The lieutenant's mandibles were chattering with nervousness as she frantically worked her console. "Sir, I'm reading some sort of energy field around their vessels. It's not like any shielding technology in our databases. The plasma charges are being absorbed, redirected. I'm not sure what I'm looking at." "Time's up, Admiral," Vasquez's voice cut through the growing panic on the bridge. "I tried to warn you." The human ship suddenly changed course, spreading out in a formation that looked deceptively simple but struck every Valdorian tactical officer as fundamentally wrong. They were moving too fast, turning too sharply, and somehow managing to stay in perfect coordination despite using what appeared to be primitive chemical propulsion. "Sir, I'm detecting massive energy signatures from the human vessels," reported the ship's sensor operator, his voice climbing steadily toward hysteria. "Power levels are, that can't be right. That can't possibly be right. What are you reading?" Knox demanded. "Each human ship is generating approximately 4.7 billion terawatts of contained energy. Sir, that's more power than our entire fleet combined." The bridge fell silent except for the increasingly urgent beeping of various alarm systems. 4.7 billion terawatts per ship, 17 ships. The mathematical implications made Knox's brain hurt. "That's impossible," he whispered. "Their technology is centuries behind ours. We've studied their transmissions, their primitive spacecraft, their laughable attempts at faster-than-light travel. They barely managed to reach their own moon 60 years ago." "Admiral," Vashkill's voice was small and tight with fear. "I don't think those are the same humans." On the display, Captain Vasquez was still smiling that same pleasant conversational smile. But now there was something else in her eyes. Something that made every survival instinct in Knox's ancient evolutionary programming start screaming warnings. "You see, Admiral," she said, her tone still maddeningly casual, "there's something we probably should have mentioned earlier. Those primitive humans you've been studying, the ones who took 60 years to reach their own moon. Well, that was 60 years ago, and humans. We have this annoying little tendency to get better at things. Much better. Exponentially better. The first human ship opened fire. What emerged from its weapons ports wasn't plasma, wasn't particle beams, wasn't anything in the Valdorian tactical manual. It was something that looked like controlled lightning, if lightning could think and had a particularly nasty sense of humor. The energy stream reached out across space and touched the hull of a Valdorian cruiser. The cruiser didn't explode, it didn't fragment. It didn't even have time to send a distress signal. One moment it was there, a proud symbol of hegemony military might. The next moment it was a rapidly expanding cloud of component atoms, as if someone had simply decided that the ship's structural integrity was more of a suggestion than a law of physics. Evasive maneuvers, Kreknox roared, but his words were lost in the cacophony of alarms and panicked communications flooding the bridge. His fleet, the most powerful military force in known space, was scattering like fish before sharks. Or human weapons fired, each shot precise and economical. No wasted energy, no unnecessary destruction, just clean, efficient obliteration. Ships that had survived countless battles across a dozen star systems were being erased from existence with surgical precision. "Sir, the human vessels are moving through our formation," the tactical officer reported, his voice cracking with stress. "They're not following any known physics. They're accelerating at over 200 gravities with no apparent inertial effects on the crew, making turns that should tear their ships apart, and somehow maintaining perfect firing solutions throughout." Kreknox watched in growing horror as his mighty fleet was systematically dismantled by 17 ships that shouldn't have been able to scratch their paint. The humans moved through space like they owned it, their vessels dancing between Valdorian fire with an elegance that was almost insulting. "How are they doing this?" he whispered to no one in particular. Captain Vasquez must have heard him somehow, because her voice came through the communications array with crystalline clarity. "Oh, that's simple, Admiral. You see, we humans have been expecting someone like you for quite some time. We've had 60 years to prepare, and we're really quite good at preparing for things. Especially unpleasant things involving large, aggressive aliens who think they can waltz into our solar system and demand our surrender." Another section of the Valdorian fleet ceased to exist as the human weapons found their marks. The pattern was becoming clear now. They weren't trying to capture ships or take prisoners. They were methodically eliminating every threat with cold, calculated efficiency. "You're slaughtering them," Kreknox accused, though the moral outrage felt somewhat hollow coming from someone who had been planning to do exactly the same thing 5 minutes earlier. "Slaughtering?" Vasquez seemed genuinely surprised by the accusation. "Admiral, we offered you the chance to leave. You chose to open fire on us instead. What did you expect would happen?" "We expected you to die like the primitive vermin you are." Kreknox snarled, his composure finally cracking completely. "Ah, well, there's your first mistake," Vasquez replied conversationally. "You see, humans stopped being primitive the moment we figured out how to split the atom. Everything since then has just been us getting creative with the applications." The apex predator shuddered as something struck its shields. Not weapons fire. Debris from another Valdorian ship that had just learned the hard way that even the most advanced armor was no match for weapons that could rewrite the fundamental laws of matter. "Sir, we've lost 60% of the fleet," Vashkil reported, her voice hollow with disbelief. "The humans they're not even damaged. Not a single ship. How is that possible?" Kreknox stared at the tactical display, watching the systematic destruction of everything he had believed about humanity, about the hegemony's superiority, about the natural order of the universe. His proud fleet, the terror of a dozen systems, was being taken apart like a training exercise. "Captain Vasquez," he said finally, his voice carrying the weight of impending defeat. "What do you want?" "What do I want?" She seemed to consider the question seriously. "Well, Admiral, I want you to go home. I want you to tell your superiors exactly what happened here today. And I want you to make sure they understand that Earth is off limits, permanently. And if we refuse?" Vasquez's smile widened, and for the first time Kreknox realized that what he had mistaken for pleasant confidence was actually something far more dangerous. It was the smile of a predator that had just realized its prey was exactly where it wanted it. "Admiral, do you know what humans call the period between our first flight and our first moon landing?" "We call it 66 years. Do you know what we call the period between our first moon landing and today?" "We call it the warm-up." The transmission cut off, leaving the bridge of the apex predator in stunned silence. Around them, the remains of the Valdorian Third Fleet continued their desperate attempts to escape the human weapons, but it was becoming increasingly clear that escape was a luxury the humans might not be inclined to grant. Krek Knox slumped in his command chair, staring at the tactical display that showed his military career ending in the most humiliating defeat in hegemony history. 17 human ships had just destroyed the most powerful fleet in known space, and they had done it without breaking a sweat. "Sir," Vashkil whispered, "what are your orders?" He looked at her, this young officer who had trusted in Valdorian superiority right up until the moment that superiority had been revealed as a comfortable delusion. What orders could he possibly give? Retreat, surrender, try to explain to High Command that the primitive humans had just rewritten everything they thought they knew about warfare. Signal the remaining ships, he said finally. Full retreat, maximum speed, and pray to whatever gods still listen that the humans are feeling merciful today. As the battered remnants of the Valdorian fleet began their desperate flight toward the edge of the system, Admiral Krek Knox couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The humans had revealed their hand, but somehow he suspected they had been holding back. The real question wasn't whether the hegemony could defeat Earth. The real question was whether Earth would allow the hegemony to continue existing. Behind them, 17 human ships hung in space like patient sentinels, their weapons powered down but their message delivered with devastating clarity. The age of Valdorian dominance was over, ended not with the slow decline of an aging empire, but with the sudden, shocking realization that somewhere in the galaxy, humanity had been growing up, and humans, as it turned out, did not play well with bullies. 3 days later, Admiral Krek Knox stood before the Valdorian High Council, his ceremonial armor stripped of rank insignia, and his future hanging by the thinnest of threads. The great circular chamber of the hegemony's capital world, Vorthak Prime, had witnessed countless victory celebrations over the millennia. Today it bore witness to something entirely different, the testimony of a survivor. "Let me understand this correctly, Admiral," Supreme Commander Thexvoran's voice dripped with barely controlled fury, his massive frame looming over the council podium. "You lost an entire fleet, 412 vessels, to 17 human ships." "Yes, Supreme Commander," Krek Knox replied, his voice hoarse from 3 days of interrogation. "But what I've been trying to explain is that these weren't the same humans we've been monitoring. Something has changed, something fundamental." General Kieksmal's laugh was like grinding metal. "Changed? Admiral, your own reports from 6 months ago described humans as barely capable of interplanetary travel. Are you suggesting they've somehow developed faster than light warfare capabilities in half a year?" "I'm suggesting we underestimated them," Krek Knox said quietly. "Catastrophically." The chamber erupted in derisive chittering from the assembled military leadership. The idea that the mighty Valdorian hegemony could underestimate anyone, let alone a species that had only recently figured out how to leave their own solar system, was apparently hilarious to everyone except the one being who had actually faced humanity in battle. Supreme Commander Thexvoran raised a claw for silence. "Admiral, your tactical recordings show human vessels moving at impossible speeds, generating impossible power levels, and utilizing weapons technology that defies known physics. Either you fabricated this data to cover your incompetence, or you expect us to believe that humans have somehow achieved technological advancement beyond our own." "I expect you to believe the evidence," Krek Knox replied, his exhaustion finally overcoming his sense of military protocol, "because in approximately 72 hours that evidence is going to arrive here whether you believe it or not." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ventilation systems seemed to hold their breath. "Explain," Thexvoran commanded. "The human fleet didn't just defeat us, Supreme Commander. They followed us. They're currently 3 days behind my surviving ships, and they're not coming to negotiate." General Kieksmal leaned forward, her compound eyes gleaming with predatory interest. "How many ships?" "Unknown. Our long-range sensors detected at least 100 vessels before we lost contact with our rear guard. But given what I witnessed at Earth, I suspect numbers aren't really the relevant factor anymore. 100 human ships against the entire hegemony home fleet, against our orbital defense platforms, against 6,000 vessels of the most advanced military force in the galaxy. Thixvoran's mandibles clicked in amusement. Admiral, either these humans are suicidal, or you've completely lost your mind. Before Kreknox could respond, an aide rushed into the chamber, his breathing apparatus wheezing with panic. Supreme Commander, urgent transmission from Defense Perimeter Alpha. Long-range sensors have detected an approaching fleet. The blood drained from every face in the chamber. Well, the equivalent of blood anyway. Valdorians didn't actually have blood in the traditional sense, but their hemolymph certainly knew how to express terror. How many? Thixvoran's voice was barely above a whisper. Sir, initial count shows this can't be right, over 8,000 vessels. 8,000. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. The hegemony's entire military across all systems barely numbered 7,000 ships, and most of those were scattered across their empire, maintaining order among subjugated species. Impossible, General Mal breathed. Humans don't have 8,000 ships. They barely have 17. They had 17 that I saw, Kreknox corrected grimly. Apparently they had a few more at home. The aide continued his report, his voice climbing steadily toward hysteria. Supreme Commander, the fleet is maintaining formation and heading directly for Vorthak Prime. Estimated arrival, 14 hours. They're broadcasting a message on all frequencies. Let's hear it, Thixvoran commanded, though his voice suggested he already knew he wasn't going to like what came next. The chamber's communication system crackled to life, and Captain Elena Vasquez's voice filled the space with that same conversational tone that had haunted Kreknox's nightmares for 3 days. Greetings, Valdorian High Council. This is Captain Vasquez of the United Earth Defense Force. I believe you're familiar with my work. There was a pause that might have contained the faintest hint of amusement. By now, Admiral Kreknox has presumably explained what happened to your third fleet. I do hope he was thorough in his report, because I'd hate for there to be any misunderstandings about our capabilities. The Supreme Commander's claws were leaving deep scratches in his armrests. He'd continue the message. The hegemony has exactly 12 hours to begin the complete withdrawal of all military forces from every system you currently occupy. You will release every subjugated species, dismantle your orbital weapons platforms, and reduce your fleet to no more than 50 vessels for defensive purposes only. Failure to comply will result in the immediate termination of your government and the liberation of your territories by force. The message paused again, and when Vasquez's voice returned, there was something different about it. Something that made even the most battle-hardened generals in the chamber unconsciously step backward. Oh, and Supreme Commander Thixvoran? Admiral Kreknox was absolutely correct about underestimating us. The difference is he lived to learn from his mistake. You have 11 hours and 57 minutes to decide whether you'd like to join him in that particular learning experience. The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence. 8,000 ships. Complete withdrawal from occupied territories. The dissolution of an empire that had ruled the galaxy for over 2 millennia. The demands were so outrageous they would have been laughable, if not for the fact that Admiral Kreknox was nodding slowly in agreement. Supreme Commander General Keeksmal's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. Surely they're bluffing. No species could have developed such a massive fleet without our intelligence networks detecting it. Our intelligence networks didn't detect 17 ships that could obliterate an entire battle group, Kreknox pointed out with bitter accuracy. What makes you think they would have detected 8,000? Thixvoran stood slowly, his massive frame casting shadows across the chamber. All ships, red alert status. Recall every available vessel to home system. Activate all defense platforms. If these humans want a war, we'll give them one they'll never forget. Supreme Commander Kreknox said quietly, respectfully, I don't think you understand what we're facing. Enlighten me, Admiral. The humans aren't just technologically superior. They're strategically superior. They knew exactly what they were doing when they let my ships escape. They wanted us to report back. They wanted you to mobilize the entire home fleet in one location. They're not coming here to fight a battle, Supreme Commander. They're coming here to end the war before it starts. The implications of that statement settled over the chamber like a burial shroud. If Krek Nox was correct, then the hegemony's greatest strength, their concentrated military might, had just become their greatest weakness. Explain, Thexvoran commanded. They could have destroyed my entire fleet at Earth. Instead, they let some of us escape. They could have pursued us immediately with overwhelming force. Instead, they gave us time to reach home and report. They could have made their demands through diplomatic channels. Instead, they're arriving with enough firepower to glass every planet in the system. Kreknox's voice was flat with certainty. Supreme Commander, this isn't an invasion. It's an execution. The next 10 hours passed in a blur of frantic preparations that everyone knew were futile. The hegemony's home fleet, 6,000 vessels strong, arranged itself in defensive formations around Vorthak Prime. Orbital defense platforms powered up weapons that could crack moons. Ground-based missile systems armed warheads capable of sterilizing continents. And through it all, Admiral Krek Nox stood in the command center, watching the preparations with the detached interest of someone who had already accepted the inevitable. Admiral, Supreme Commander Thexvoran approached him as the final hour counted down. Your tactical assessment. Honest assessment, Supreme Commander. We're about to discover whether humans are capable of mercy. The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel exactly on schedule, appearing at the edge of the system like a constellation of death. 8,000 ships, each one broadcasting energy signatures that made the Valdorian fleet look like toys in comparison. But it wasn't the numbers that broke the spirit of the hegemony's defenders. It wasn't even the impossible technology. It was the formation the human fleet assumed as it approached Vorthak Prime, a perfect sphere completely surrounding the planet and its defenses, with mathematical precision that suggested this had all been planned down to the smallest detail. They're not even bothering with military formations, General Kieix Mal whispered, staring at the tactical display. They're surrounding us like we're animals in a cage. Captain Vasquez's voice echoed across every communication channel in the system, calm and professional as always. Valdorian forces, this is your final opportunity to stand down. Power down your weapons, disarm your orbital platforms and prepare for the orderly transition of government. You have 60 seconds to comply. Supreme Commander Thexvoran's response was everything you'd expect from a military leader who had never learned the meaning of defeat. Human vessels, you are outnumbered and outgunned. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences. Outnumbered? There was genuine amusement in Vasquez's voice now. Supreme Commander, I think you may want to check your mathematics. We count 6,000 Valdorian vessels. We brought 8,000. But honestly, numbers stopped being relevant about 60 years ago. Then why did you bring so many ships? Thexvoran demanded. Because, Supreme Commander, we wanted to make sure you understood that this isn't a battle. This is a demonstration. Every species in the galaxy is watching what happens here today. We wanted to make sure the lesson was clear. The countdown reached 0. What happened next would be debated by military historians for generations, assuming there were any military historians left to debate it. The human fleet didn't fire weapons in any conventional sense. Instead, they seemed to simply decide that the Valdorian fleet should stop existing, and reality obligingly complied. Ships didn't explode, they didn't fragment. They didn't even have time to send final transmissions. One moment, 6,000 vessels of the hegemony home fleet were defending their capital. The next moment there was empty space where they had been, as if the universe had simply edited them out of existence. The orbital defense platforms lasted slightly longer, perhaps because they were larger targets. They had nearly 3 seconds to register the incoming energy before they too were removed from the equation with surgical precision. Through it all, the planet itself remained untouched. 8,000 human ships surrounded Vorthak Prime like a protective barrier, their weapons silent now that all military resistance had been eliminated. Supreme Commander Thexvoran, Captain Vasquez's voice was as conversational as ever. You are relieved of command. The Valdorian hegemony is hereby dissolved. All occupied territories are granted immediate independence. Your remaining government officials have 72 hours to arrange an orderly transition of power to locally elected representatives. In the command bunker deep beneath the capital city, Supreme Commander Thex Voran stared at displays that showed nothing but empty space where his fleet had been. "This is impossible," he whispered. "We ruled this galaxy for 2,000 years. We cannot be defeated by humans." Captain Vasquez's voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Supreme Commander, you made the same mistake every bully eventually makes. You confused the absence of resistance with the absence of capability." Admiral Kreknox spoke for the first time in hours, his voice carrying the weight of terrible understanding. "How long have you been watching us?" "Watching you?" "Admiral, we've been studying you since the moment your first scout ships entered our solar system 60 years ago. Did you really think we wouldn't notice? Did you honestly believe that a species capable of faster-than-light travel wouldn't have some method of long-range surveillance?" The truth hit like a physical blow. 60 years. The humans had known about the hegemony for 60 years, had been watching, learning, preparing. While the Valdorians had dismissed them as primitives, humanity had been conducting the most comprehensive intelligence operation in galactic history. "But your technology," General Kiexmal protested weakly. "Your ships, your weapons. How did you advance so quickly?" "General, you've been monitoring our public transmissions. Our entertainment broadcasts, our news reports, our scientific journals. What you missed were our classified research programs, our military developments, our contingency plans for dealing with hostile alien contact." Vasquez paused, and when she continued, there was something almost like sympathy in her voice. "You see, humans have this peculiar trait. When we're faced with an existential threat, we don't just rise to the occasion. We exceed it, dramatically." The communication systems throughout the capital crackled to life, broadcasting a message that would be repeated on every world that had once been part of the hegemony. But this time it wasn't Captain Vasquez speaking. It was a different voice, older, more formal, carrying the authority of someone accustomed to addressing entire civilizations. "Citizens of the former Valdorian territories, this is President Sarah Martinez of the United Earth Government. As of today, you are free. The hegemony's military has been neutralized, their government dissolved, and their ability to project force beyond their home system permanently eliminated. You are free to govern yourselves, to choose your own destinies, to build the futures you desire." The message continued, outlining humanitarian aid, technological assistance and protection guarantees for species that had lived under Valdorian rule for generations. But in the command bunker, Supreme Commander Thex Voran had stopped listening. He was staring at Admiral Kreknox with something approaching respect. "You tried to warn us," he said quietly. "I tried to warn you," Kreknox agreed. "But would you have listened? Would any of you have believed that the species we'd dismissed as primitive had become the most powerful military force in the galaxy while we weren't paying attention?" Outside, 8,000 human ships maintained their protective formation around Vorthak Prime, their presence a gentle but unmistakable reminder of the new reality. The age of Valdorian dominance was over, ended not through gradual decline or internal collapse, but through the sudden, shocking realization that somewhere in the cosmos, humanity had grown up. And humans, as the galaxy was learning, did not tolerate bullies. The transition of power was surprisingly smooth. Perhaps because resistance seemed pointless when facing a species that could eliminate entire fleets with the casual ease of switching off a light. Perhaps because, deep down, even the most ardent hegemony supporters knew that their empire had been built on oppression and maintained through fear. Or perhaps because Captain Elena Vasquez had been absolutely right. Humans didn't just rise to meet existential threats. They exceeded them. And in exceeding them, they had become something the galaxy had never seen before, a species with the power to rule everything and the wisdom to choose not to. 3 months later, Admiral Craig Knox stood on the observation deck of a civilian transport, watching Earth grow larger in the viewport. He was traveling as part of a diplomatic mission, the first official Valdorian delegation to visit humanity's home world since the dissolution of the hegemony. The planet looked deceptively peaceful from space, its blue and white surface giving no hint of the technological marvels hidden beneath its atmosphere. But Craig Knox knew better now. He knew that this small, insignificant-looking world had somehow produced a species capable of reshaping the galactic order in a matter of hours. Beautiful, isn't it? The voice belonged to Captain Vasquez, who had personally agreed to escort the diplomatic mission. Hard to believe something so peaceful-looking could produce such terrifying warriors. "Are you warriors?" Craig Knox asked. "Or are you something else entirely?" Vasquez considered the question seriously. "We're whatever we need to be, Admiral. When threatened, we become weapons. When needed, we become protectors. When challenged, we become innovators." She smiled, that same conversational smile that had haunted his dreams for months. "But most of the time we just try to be human. And what does that mean? It means we make mistakes, we learn from them, and we try to do better next time. It means we help those who need help and stop those who cause harm. It means we never give up, never surrender, and never accept that things can't be improved." She looked out at her home world with obvious affection. "It means we're stubborn, creative, occasionally irrational beings who refuse to accept limitations." Admiral Craig Knox nodded slowly, finally understanding what the hegemony had truly faced. Not just advanced technology or superior tactics, but something far more dangerous, a species that viewed the impossible as merely inconvenient. As Earth grew larger in the viewport, he couldn't help but wonder what other impossible things humanity might accomplish in the years to come. Whatever they were, he was certain of one thing: the galaxy would never be the same. After all, they were just humans, and humans, as it turned out, were capable of absolutely anything.